The night was cold and silent. As John sat inside his small shelter made of metal sheets and old solar panels, he was reading an old journal under the week light of a flickering lamp when a soft knock came at the door. It was strange because this moon was empty. No one lived close to him, and no ships had landed in weeks. The knock came again, softer, this time almost like a whisper of wind. Against metal, John stood up slowly, heart pounding. He grabbed the old plasma cutter from the wall. Not to use, but to feel safe, he stepped to the door and pressed the screen. It showed nothing but darkness. He opened the door just a little and looked out. The cold air rushed in, along with the smell of dust and something floral, something not human there. She was standing alone in the pale blue light of the twin moons. Her skin was soft green, her eyes large and glowing, her dress torn and dirty. Two small children were hiding behind her legs, their faces half hidden under a thin cloth. She looked up at John with a mix of fear and hope in her eyes. She spoke in a trembling voice, one John had never heard before, but his translator picked it up clearly. She said, "Please, human, I can warm your bed. My children need a father." Her voice cracked near the end as she pushed the kids forward. They said nothing, just stared with eyes too old for their small faces. John froze, not knowing what to say. No one had ever asked him such a thing before. Especially not like this, especially not someone not human. He looked at her again, then at the children, then back at her. She looked thin, weak, like she had walked far, maybe 4 days. Maybe with no food, no water, no safety. Why would she come to him? Why would she say something like that? He opened the door wider without speaking and stepped back. She hesitated for a second, then walked in slowly. Her feet bare her steps, quiet like someone afraid of being too loud, afraid of waking something dangerous. The children followed her, silently clutching each other like they were one person split in two. He closed the door behind them. The sound echoed in the room like the closing of a vault. He pointed to a corner where an old blanket lay and said, "You can sleep there for now." She nodded and sat down carefully, wrapping the kids in the blanket like a shield against the world. She didn't ask for food or water. She just sat there holding them, watching John like she expected him to say something more. He made them some warm soup from his supplies, poured it into 3 cups, and placed them on the floor in front of her. She took the cups with shaky hands, gave them to the children first, and then sipped her own without a word. Her eyes stayed on John the whole time, not in fear, but in something else. Maybe testing, maybe measuring. After a while, John sat back down on his bed across the room. The silence was thick, but not heavy, more like a question, waiting for an answer. She spoke again, this time softer. "I had no choice. They would have died. We were hunted after my mate died. The others said I should find a human. Some said they are cruel, some said they are kind. I took the chance." John didn't know what to say. He had come to this moon to escape, not to be needed, not to be someone else's hope. But now there was a woman here, and 2 small lives looking at him like he was the sun on a cloudy day. He asked her name, and she said, "Sa." Her voice soft like falling leaves. The children had names to Rin and Aura. Quiet, shy, tired, but they smiled when he gave them something sweet from a tin can he had saved for a lonely day. It was not much, but their eyes lit up like stars in the dark. Shone lay in his bed that night, eyes open, listening to the soft breathing from the corner. 3 lives now inside his home, unplanned, unexpected, unknown. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but he knew one thing: he could not turn them away, not now. After hearing her voice, not after seeing their faces, not after feeling something deep inside him shift, something he thought he had buried long ago, something like purpose, something like hope, had far away in the dark. Outside eyes watched from the trees, eyes that did not like what they had seen, eyes full of silence and warning. But for now, inside the small metal shelter, there was warmth and stillness and the quiet heartbeat of something new beginning. Morning came slow with a gray sky and soft wind outside the metal shelter. John opened his eyes to the quiet sound of something cooking. The smell was not from any food. He knew it was sweet and strange, like flowers mixed with firewood. He sat up and looked around the room. Still half asleep, Ree stood near the corner with her hands over a small portable heater. One he had forgotten. He even had on top of it sat a tiny metal pot filled with a thick purple soup. It bubbled slowly while the two alien children sat close watching the heat rise, their faces calm and peaceful. John rubbed his eyes and stepped forward. Ree turned her head and gave a small nod without speaking. Her hair looked cleaner, now her eyes a little brighter. The fear from last night had not vanished, but it had faded like the last stars of morning. He asked if she had slept, and she said yes. The children too had slept without nightmares. Something rare, she added, as if nightmares followed them more than sleep. He asked about the soup, and she said it was made from dried roots she carried with her, wrapped in cloth, hidden deep in her bag. They were the last pieces of her old home. They ate together in silence. The taste was bitter at first, then warm and soft inside, like something alive. John had never eaten alien food before, but he did not complain. The children giggled once when he made a funny face, and Ree gave a small smile that disappeared quickly, like it had been stolen by memory after breakfast. John tried to clean the tools near his workbench, but his eyes kept drifting back to the corner where Ree was now folding the blanket. With careful hands, her children helped her like they had done it many times before. He asked her again why she had come to him. She looked up and then down, as if choosing each word. Slowly, she said, humans were known in the nearby villages as dangerous or kind, depending on the story. The story she had heard was about a human who saved a sick alien child and fixed broken machines for no payment, just kindness. She believed that story and came to find someone like that, someone who might help her survive, someone who might protect her children, even if it meant offering something she did not want to offer. She added that part without shame, just truth. John felt his chest tighten at her words. It was not pity, it was something deeper, something heavier, like he had been pulled into a river with no way back. He had lived alone for years, no friends, no love, no trust, but now this stranger had entered his life like a storm, and nothing felt the same. He offered to fix a small toy the children had. It was broken and missing parts. Ree handed it over without asking what he would want in return. He sat with the pieces in his hand, and for the first time in months, he felt his fingers move with purpose again. He worked until the toy could light up and spin. The children clapped with joy and hugged him. That moment passed quickly, but left a month later. They stepped outside for fresh air. The sky was wide and blue, and the trees tall and golden. The air smelled of metal and soil, and something sweet. Ree looked up and said this place was once full of light and trade, and songs. Now it was just echoes and warnings. John asked about her mate, and she grew quiet, then spoke slowly. He was a miner, strong and kind. He died when a tunnel collapsed near the human zones. No one came to help, and the council said it was just bad luck, but she believed it was more. She believed someone knew it would happen, and said nothing. Since then she had been hunted by debt, by shame, by eyes that said she was cursed. The only thing she had left was her children, and her will to find safety. Her mate had said once, "If I die, find the humans. They are cruel, but not all of them now." She stood with one of them, and her eyes were asking if he was like the ones her mate feared, or the one her mate hoped she would meet. John had no answer, only silence, but in his silence, she seemed to hear something that made her nod slowly, as if she had found her answer already. The day passed like a soft breath, and night returned with stars above. The children slept early, and John sat outside, staring at the moons. Ree joined him, wrapped in the old blanket he had given her. Her voice was quiet, but steady. She said thank you, not just for the food, or the room, or the toy, but for not closing the door last night, for listening, for not asking questions she was not ready to answer. John looked at her, and then the stars, then back at her again. He still did not speak, but he knew now he would not let her go, not yet. Maybe not ever inside the shelter. Something small and silent had changed something that might become strong if they let it grow. The morning sun rose slow over the alien trees, casting golden light through broken clouds. John stepped outside with a metal mug of warm tea in his hand. The silence was deep, almost too perfect. Like the forest was holding its breath, he walked around the shelter, checking the solar panels, brushing away fallen leaves and dust, as he did every day since he moved here. But something felt different today. Something quiet and sharp, like the feeling before a storm. He looked up and saw it tied to a branch. Above his roof, a piece of red cloth painted with black lines forming a strange symbol he had never seen before. He pulled it down and brought it inside. Sari froze the moment she saw it, her face pale, her eyes wide with memory and fear. She whispered that this was a warning, a mark from the village. It meant he had been watched and judged, and they did not approve of what he had done. John asked her if they were in danger. She said not yet, but danger was coming if he kept her here, if he kept her children under his roof. Then they would see him as one of them, as a traitor, as a human who chose an alien over his own kind, over peace, over safety. John said he did not care what they thought, but Sari looked away and said, sometimes thoughts become weapons when enough people believe them. Later that day, while the children played with metal scraps, turning them into toy creatures, John walked to the edge of the forest, near the path that led to the village. He stopped at the old stone marker and stared down the winding trail. Memories came back of when he first landed here, how the villagers had helped him build his shelter, how they had shared food and stories and smiles. Now all of that felt like smoke slipping through fingers. He turned back, but as he walked, he saw it, another symbol painted on a rock near his fuel supply. Red lines shaped like fire, crossed by a single black tear. Sari told him that this meant sorrow was coming, that the village mourned something that had not yet happened, something they believed would happen because of him, because of her, because of the choice she had made to knock on his door. That night, while the children slept, John sat by the heater with Sari. He asked her what she wanted, what she truly wanted, not just for herself, but for her children, for the future. She looked into the flames and said she wanted peace, not just safety, but peace, a place where her children could grow without shame, without whispers, without fear. She said she came to him not just because he was human, but because she had heard stories, stories that he was different, that he had helped others when no one else did. John said he was not a hero. He said he was just a man trying to survive, just like her, just like anyone. Sari smiled a sad smile and said sometimes survival is the bravest thing of all. The next day, when John opened his door, he found something lying on the ground, a broken toy one he had fixed for the village chief's son months ago. It was smashed into pieces and wrapped in a cloth stained with black dust. Sari saw it and said it was a message. The past was broken. The bond was cut. He was no longer part of their circle. Did not speak. He picked up the toy and placed it on his workbench, carefully, as if it still had life. Then he closed the door and bolted it for the first time since he had arrived on this moon. That evening, loud thumps came from outside. Not footsteps, not voices, just heavy thumps, like someone dropping rocks near his door. When he opened it, no one was there, but 3 stones lay on the ground, each painted red, each marked with the same black circle he had seen before. He collected them and brought them inside, placing them beside the broken toy without a word say. Ree held his hand for the first time. No words, no promises, just fingers wrapped together in silence, like a rope holding 2 lives, steady in a rising wind. Nays. The sky darkened and the stars began to shine. The children slept without dreams, and John stayed awake, listening not just for danger, but for change. Something was shifting, something deep, something old and heavy, something that could not be undone. Outside, the trees whispered and the village watched, but inside the shelter warmth remained. Not just from the heater, but from something else, something slowly growing in the space between fear and trust. John looked at Sari, and she looked at him. No smiles, no tears. Just eyes speaking the only truth that mattered. They were no longer alone. They were no longer strangers, and no matter what came next, they would face it together. Wind was colder that morning, and the sky was dark, with low clouds hanging over the treetops like a heavy blanket. John stepped outside with his toolkit ready to fix the solar panels that had been glitching since the last storm. He looked around and felt a strange emptiness, like the forest was holding its breath again, the same feeling he had when the red symbol first appeared. He turned back toward the shelter and noticed the door slightly open, not wide, just enough to let in cold air. He pushed it and called for Sari. She answered from the back room with panic in her voice, saying the children were gone. Her hands trembled as she pointed to the blanket still folded on the floor, untouched from last night. The toy creatures made from scrap were scattered across the floor like they had been dropped. Suddenly John ran outside again, calling the names of Rin and Aura, his voice echoing through the trees. Without reply, he searched near the fuel shed, near the water tank, behind the tall rocks where the children sometimes played. There was no sign of them. No small footprints, no broken branches, no trail, only silence that grew louder with each passing minute. He returned to Sari, who now stood frozen, staring at the sky with both hands clenched at her sides. She said they had been taken not by villagers, not by beasts, but by something else, something old and forgotten, something her people called the spirits. She said the spirits watched over children who carried sorrow and pain, and sometimes they came at night to test them to see if they were strong enough to carry the memory of their kind. John wanted to argue, wanted to say there was no such thing as spirits, only tracks and logic and tools. But when he looked into her eyes, he saw something ancient, something beyond explanation, something that made him believe, even if just for this moment. He packed a small bag with water and tools and lights and told her he was going to find them. She tried to stop him, but he placed his hand on her shoulder and said, "If there is a test, then I will help them pass it. If there is danger, then I will take their place. If they are lost, I will bring them home." He walked into the forest alone, the trees closing behind him like gates of an old, forgotten kingdom. The path twisted and split, and the light grew thin. The ground was damp and cold, and strange flowers bloomed near fallen logs, their petals glowing faint blue like stardust. John followed the faint echoes of laughter, not clear, not loud, just faint enough to make him walk faster. Hours passed with no clear direction, only instinct guiding his steps. He crossed a shallow stream and reached a wide clearing filled with dead machines. Human machines, broken and rusted and covered in moss. One of them still had blinking lights, weak and irregular, like a heartbeat slowly fading. He stepped closer and saw two small shadows moving behind one of the large metal arms. Rin and Aura were sitting on the cold ground, whispering to each other, holding a small, round object between them. It was a memory core, something old from the mining days, something John had seen once before. When he worked in the deep zones back on Mars, he called their names, and they turned slowly. No fear, no tears. Just tired eyes and soft voices saying, "We waited." John picked them up one by one and checked their hands, their faces, their clothes. They were cold and dirty, but not hurt, not scared. They pointed to the memory core and said it showed them their father, his face, his voice. His last words recorded in the machine he had worked on before the collapse. They said the spirits brought them here to remember, not to punish, not to scare, just to remember. He looked at the machine again and played the last log. The screen lit up, and a voice spoke, soft and cracked by static, saying, "If I do not return, tell them I love them. Tell them to find the human. He will protect them. I believe in the good ones. I believe they still exist." John felt something crack inside him, something old and rusted and buried. He hugged the children close and whispered, "I am here. I will protect you. I promise." On everything I have, they returned as the sky turned orange and the forest glowed with evening light. Sari ran to them and dropped to her knees, tears falling without sound as she held them. Close again, she looked at John with a gaze that held more than words, more than thanks, more than fear. It was a gaze that tied souls together without needing to speak that night. They sat together inside the shelter. No heater, no lights, just warmth from their presence, from the bond now made stronger by loss and memory and hope. John watched as the children slept and Sari leaned against his shoulder. Not for comfort, not for safety, but for something deeper, something unspoken. And far beyond the trees, the village watched again, but this time, not with anger. Not with hate, only silence, as if they too had heard the voice from the machine, as if they too had remembered what had been forgotten. The air was quiet that morning as light came through the cracks in the metal walls of the shelter. John sat beside the memory core he had carried back from the forest. His fingers brushed the buttons, gently afraid that even a small touch might erase what remained inside. Sari watched from the other side of the room, her arms wrapped around the children who still slept with peaceful faces, unaware that something had changed forever. John pressed the button again, and the log played once more. The same static, the same trembling voice filled the small space, the voice of Sari's husband, saying, "If I do not return, tell them I love them. Tell them to find the human. He will protect them. I believe in the good ones. I believe they still exist." Sari stood and walked over, her eyes full of something old and sharp and heavy. She stared at the screen, her hands clenched tightly at her sides. John looked up and asked if she had ever heard that message before. She shook her head and said this was the first time she had heard his voice since the day the tunnel collapsed. She reached out and touched the memory core as if it were his face, not a device, not a machine, but something alive, something sacred, something filled with the last breath of a man she once loved. Her voice was soft when she said he always believed in humans, even when others did not, even when they laughed at him, even when they warned him to stay away. John stayed silent, knowing that words would only break the moment. He let her stand there for as long as she needed. Then she turned to him with eyes full of tears and something stronger, something like fire, something like choice. She said, "I did not come here just for safety. I came because I felt something. I did not understand something that told me you were different." She stepped closer and said, "I was not ready to speak it then. And I'm still afraid. But I need you to know that I am not here to take space or steal warmth. I am here because you are the one he saw, the one he trusted without ever meeting, the one who now holds what he left behind." John felt the weight of her words like stones placed slowly on his chest. Not crushing, but grounding, pulling him into the earth, into truth, into something deeper than fear or loneliness. He reached out and placed his hand over hers, and for a moment, the past and present lived in the same breath. Later that day, they buried the memory core near the tall blue tree behind the shelter. Sari placed flowers made of folded leaves over the small mound and whispered old words in her native tongue, words of farewell and words of thanks. The children each placed a stone beside the flowers and bowed their heads in silence. John stood with them, his hand resting on Sari's shoulder, as if to say, "You are not alone, not anymore, not ever again." They did not speak as they walked back inside. Only the sound of soft wind and the gentle hum of life around them filled the air. That night, Sari cooked a meal using herbs she had hidden in her bag, herbs that smelled like sunlight and rain. She said her husband used to bring them home after long shifts underground, and they would cook together and tell stories about stars they had never seen. John listened with a small smile as she spoke, her voice lighter than before, her laughter soft and full of memories that no longer hurt as deeply. After the children had gone to sleep, John brought out an old box he had not opened in years. Inside were small gifts he had collected from planets he had once traveled, trinkets and lights and stones that glowed in the dark. He gave 2 glowing stones to the children and said, "These are night. Sons, they will keep bad dreams away." The children smiled and placed them beside their pillows, holding them like treasures from another world. Ree sat beside him on the floor and said he would have liked you. He would have seen the same things. "I see now," she paused, then added, "maybe even sooner than I did. Maybe that is why I feel him when you speak, when you laugh, when you fix broken things without being asked." John looked at her and saw not just a widow, not just a mother, not just a stranger, but a woman who had walked through fire and sorrow and still stood with her head held high. He said, "I do not want to replace him. I only want to help you carry what remains." She nodded slowly and placed her head on his shoulder without words, without fear, without need for anything more. Outside the night was calm and the forest slept, and for the first time in many days there were no eyes watching, no symbols, no warnings, only the sound of leaves moving gently in the wind and the quiet promise of something new. Something still growing between 2 hearts, shaped by loss and warmed by hope. The next morning arrived with heavy skies and low wind, carrying the smell of smoke from far beyond the trees. John stepped outside and saw a trail of dust rising in the distance, moving slowly toward the shelter like a silent wave, bringing something unseen, something he could feel in his chest. Before his eyes confirmed it, Ree stood behind him, holding her children close, her voice low as she said, "They are coming," her tone calm but sharp, like a blade wrapped in cloth. John asked who she meant, and she answered, "The council, the elders, the ones who judge, the ones who punish, the ones who decide if we are allowed to live free or be taken back to silence." John looked at the road again and saw the shapes of 5 riders on tall beasts with skin like stone and eyes like glass, each one covered in dark robes with silver marks across their chests, symbols of power, symbols of control, symbols that made Ree take a step back even before they spoke. They stopped 10 steps from the door and dismounted in perfect silence. The tallest among them raised a hand and said, "We come for the widow. She does not belong here." She broke the bond of mourning. She rejected the return. She must be taken back to answer for her defiance. Her voice calm, her eyes empty, her words cold like ice that never melts. John stepped forward and said, "She is under my protection. She came to me in need. I gave her safety. I gave her food. I gave her shelter. And now you want to take her like she is nothing, like she is a lost tool that must be returned to a shelf." Her children cried softly behind Ree, who stood still, her hands gripping theirs tighter with every word. Elder spoke again and said, "You are not one of us. You are human. Your laws do not rule here. Your kindness does not excuse your arrogance. You do not understand what she has done. She left behind her duty. She ignored the rituals. She dared to seek a new path without permission. She must choose now. Return with us or stay with you and be exiled forever." Ree looked at John, her eyes full of storms and sorrow and strength. She turned to the council and said, "I have made my choice already. I choose him. I choose this life. I choose the one who saw me as more than broken, more than burden. I will not go back to silence. I will not go back to fear." The council did not move, did not speak for a long moment. Then the elder said, "If you choose this path, you lose your name, you lose your past, you lose all rights under the stars of your people. You become nothing more than shadow." She nodded and said, "Then let me be shadow, if that is what freedom costs." John reached for her hand and said, "No, you will not be shadow. Not here, not with me. You will be light. You will be home. You will be safe." The children looked up at him with wide eyes, and for the first time both said together, "Father," their voices small but strong, like seeds pushing through stone. The elder looked at them all and said, "Then we leave you to your fate." The riders turned and mounted their beasts again, without anger, without hate, just silence, the kind that follows decisions that cannot be undone. They rode away without looking back, and the dust swallowed them like they had never been. Fell to her knees not in weakness, but in release, like a weight had been lifted after years of pressure. John knelt beside her, wrapping his arms around her and the children in one long, quiet embrace that spoke louder than any vow, louder than any law, louder than any name ever given or taken. That night they did not light the heater. They sat close near the center of the room, wrapped in old blankets and new warmth, the kind that only comes after standing against the storm and still standing tall, the kind that fills the space between pain and peace. John told them stories from his past, not all happy, not all sad, but all true and sad. Re-listened with eyes that no longer looked for escape, no longer waited for judgment, only listened, only stayed. The children fell asleep with soft smiles, holding each other, holding pieces of metal shaped like stars that John had carved during the quiet hours. Say leaned against him and said, "I lost everything today, but I found something greater. I found someone who chose me without knowing all my flaws, someone who stood beside me when no one else would, someone who became more than I ever dreamed I would deserve." John whispered back, "Then we begin again, not as lost, not as broken, not as shadow, but as family, as fire, as future." They held each other in the dark while outside the stars moved across the sky like witnesses to a new promise, born without fear, born without chains. The days passed slowly with peace wrapped around the shelter like a soft blanket. The sky stayed clear, and the forest seemed calm, as if it too had accepted what now lived within the walls of the small metal home. John worked each morning fixing broken panels, building a small fence, planting seeds in the dry soil with steady hands that no longer shook from doubt or loneliness. Sa moved through the shelter with quiet joy, her steps lighter, her eyes softer, her voice warm like early sun. She began wearing simple clothes that John had mended for her, stitching pieces of old fabric into something new, something hers, something that no longer smelled of running or hiding. The children laughed often, now playing with toys John had made from old machine parts, their small voices filling the air with sound that pushed the silence far away. One morning, as light spilled through the window, John opened the door and found a box placed outside, wrapped in leaves tied with simple twine. Inside were tools, food, herbs, and a note written in broken human script that said, "We were wrong, take these and live." The village had not come back with fire or hate. They had come with quiet hands, offering something like peace, something like apology. John showed the box to Sri, who held the note for a long time, her fingers tracing each letter like it was a prayer, her eyes wet but smiling, not from pain, but from something gentler, something like healing. She placed the herbs in jars, the tools on shelves, the food in bowls, and said, "Sometimes change takes time, even for the ones who fear it most." That evening the children danced in the yard, spinning in circles under the fading sun, their laughter rising like birds into the sky. John sat on the steps with Sri beside him, her head resting on his shoulder, her fingers locked with his, without fear, without shame, without need for words. She looked at him and said, "I once thought my story ended with loss, with sorrow, with the silence of a cold door closing. Now I see that was only the middle. Now I see the ending was not meant to be alone. It was meant to be shared. It was meant to begin again here with you." John looked into her eyes and said, "I was lost before you knocked. I was a ghost in a metal shell. I fixed things because I did not know how to fix myself. But then you came with your quiet strength, your broken hope, your children who trusted me before I even spoke, and now I see I was never meant to be alone either." That night, brought out a cloth bundle she had kept hidden since the day she arrived. Inside was a small stone shaped like a star, covered in markings from her people. She placed it on the table and said, "This is a symbol of bond, a symbol of union, not as chains, not as rule, but as trust. I give it to you, not because I must, but because I want to, because I believe you are the one who will never let go." John took the stone in both hands and nodded, not speaking, not needing, to the children placed there. hands over his, and whispered one word that held more weight than any name: father. Not just a word, not just a title, but a promise made from hearts. Now joined by choice, not blood. The next morning, the shelter felt different. Not just a place, not just a metal and wires, but a home filled with warmth, filled with light, filled with the soft rhythm of 4 hearts beating in quiet harmony. John stepped outside and saw the first green sprout breaking through the soil where he had planted seeds days ago. It stood small and bright, reaching for the sun without fear. He called the children and showed them the sprout. They clapped and laughed and named it Hope. Sari kissed his cheek and said, "You have grown more than the soil. You have grown a life where none was before. You have become the root of something that will stand even when the wind returns, even when the sky grows dark again." John held her close and whispered, "Then let the winds come. Let the sky change. Let the stars shift. We are not afraid. We are not alone. We are home." As night returned and stars lit the sky above, the family sat together near the door, wrapped in a single blanket, watching the world breathe around them. And for the first time in many years, John closed his eyes. Not with worry, not with fear, but with peace, knowing that the knock at midnight had not been the end, and it had been the beginning of everything.